Okay, my name is Gerry Fialka, and today is January 25th, 2015. It is an honor and a pleasure, Tim Corvin, to be with you. Thank you so much.
Good to have you. Good
All
to
right.
be here.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Seeking knowledge.
Yeah.
There's something they want to know.
Yeah. Do you think this need or want to collect information, gather information, is hardwired, or is it something that humans learned? Is it something that's in us innately, or is it something we actually learned?
Is it genetics or is it a learned trait?
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of both, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But I think we all have, and I certainly get them a lot, these little creative passions that are within you, and you're not going to be, it's like a bug in you. You're not going to be happy until you get that out of your system,
Yeah.
So that's what, I guess that's the origins of, as far as processing, pursuing things.
Yeah. Now, Utah Phillips says, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. What's your take on that? And if you know me, you knowing him, do you think you can suss out what he was meaning by that?
Well, I remember one of the quotes that he gave was from an old anarchist from back in the day, one of the wobbly workers, who he told this story about when the guy faced the judge, and the judge asked him how did he plead guilty or innocent, and he said he pleaded anarchy. And when the judge asked him what he meant by that, he said, well, an anarchist is anybody who doesn't need a cop to tell him what to do.
Wow, that's another way.
Right, so that's a Utah story that definitely sticks out in my mind,
So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out and said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, William Faulkner said the best fiction can be more true than journalism. Why do we as humans have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I think there's a lot of inspiration that comes from, checking out the stories of other people and what they've experienced, There's always things to be learned in that, and who goes to see a show for any other reason besides entertainment,
Yeah.
So, that's the bottom line, They want to be entertained, but at the same time, hopefully gain some kind of enlightenment through the production that they're seeing,
Yeah.
Get something out of it. So, yeah, I did theater for a number of years. I couldn't count how many shows that I was involved in, but, I knew that everybody was there to be entertained.
Yeah. Well, what first attracted you to theater and then to filmmaking? Maybe it was first theater and then filmmaking?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what first attracted you to theater? Did you go to plays growing up and then your parents were taking you and you go, oh, I want to do that? Or how did you come about that, and the same with film?
Well, from watching television and film while growing up.
Not actually going to live theater events.
No, the theater was there, but no, I never, other than school plays or church plays, I never really went out to any real live theater growing up.
But seeing these actors on TV.
Yeah, what really intrigued me the most was when I was a kid, when I would see an actor, a well-known actor, appear on a talk show, whether it was a daytime or nighttime talk show, but see them on a talk show, especially when they were well-known for a particular character that was, in a popular show or in a movie or whatever, But when you see them as themselves and you realize that they are nothing at all like that character that you know them as, when I realized this craft of acting, and it's like I was just more and more, I thought, like, that's what I want to do. I can do that, And so that's so I got into that. And
who were some of those actors you were looking up to when you were first growing up? Give me an example of one that you saw on a show like that.
Well, I'll tell you the movie that really had a big influence on me, and then the actors that came out of that movie, was Easy Rider. And so the Nicholson, Fonda, Hopper group, those guys, and Bruce Dern and Roger Corman and those films that he was making and stuff like that. And I guess a lot of them were method actors. As I eventually, when I trained for the stage, I learned the method. But Al Pacino and those guys. So just those guys who could really put on some intense performances.
Yeah.
And then when you'd see them, like I said, appearing on a talk show or something like that, and then or see them interviewed somewhere or whatever, and it's like, so So that's what drove me to it. And out of high school, I remember I graduated out here in the Inland Valley, Montclair High School, but my immediate plans was I wanted to just get out there in Hollywood and start pounding the pavements and knocking on the agents' doors and seeing if I, where's the acting work and who's looking for actors. But anyway, I ended up, right after I finished high school, I got jerked out into Colorado. I was in Colorado Springs for a couple of years. But what really ended up being a blessing out there was there was this guy from the New York stage. He'd been working out there for like a dozen different years as an actor and all kinds of other stuff, directing and producing, doing the New York scene. And he had just come into the city. I think his in-laws were ill or something like that, and they decided they had a son they didn't want to raise in New York City, so they had just come into the Springs right when I did, Colorado Springs, and so I ended up getting some professional training through some courses, workshops, and stuff that he had offered and things like that. So, so I got some grueling, intense training when I was out there, and so.
This was right out of high school?
Right out of high school, yeah.
Wow.
When I went out there, I thought at first, since I had no other choice, I just kind of got jerked out there. Here I was going at Hollywood Steps, and before I could take a step in that direction, next thing I know, I'm out in the Rocky Mountains, Yeah. But no, my plan was I just figured, well, I'm just going to stay here for 1 year, and then I'll go back and get my own place and set up and start pursuing the scene out there. But I realized after about a year of training, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder thinking I was a great actor, and these guys and that guy I was telling you about, they taught me otherwise. And I realized after about a year of training, I thought, man, I don't know crap, man. I suck compared to a lot of these other guys, And I thought, here I'm thinking I'm going to go out and get professional work in Hollywood, and I'm getting blown off the stage by amateurs in Colorado. What is that telling me, Right. So I kind of realized I had a wake-up call there. I had a few experiences that really... So I realized then I don't need to go back now. I stayed out there for another year and a half, actually, 2.5 years altogether. But I got some more training under my belt before I came back,
Right.
And as far as getting into the video and film thing, I remember being a young struggling actor out there in the Inland Valley in the early 80s and performing on a lot of stage shows. And I remember I was living out of the back of this theater. It was a storage room, living about as unconventionally as you could. But in exchange for some of my work there, I was boarding there at this theater. But, so I'm just barely getting by. And young actor looking for my niche, where can I really excel here? And now, you can attest to this, you're older than I am, but, having grown up in the pre-cable TV era, we weren't really exposed to that much visual arts, I mean, you had the mainstream movies out there, and then you had like 3 broadcast stations, and that was it, So,
and maybe a little PBS.
Right, right. But they didn't show documentaries and stuff like that out there in the movie theaters, So it wasn't until I was in my early 20s when cable started to come out where I was first beginning to become exposed to documentary productions. And the more I looked into them, and the more fascinated I was becoming, and then after a while I started saying to myself, that's what I should be doing. Forget this acting thing. If I'm going to appear before the camera, I should just be as myself and taking the viewers on some kind of a wild tour or something. That I can do.
So that sort of swung you into the film world.
Yeah, it's more and more. By this time, I was doing a lot of traveling, going around the country. I was a cross-country biker at that time, and I would go from coast to coast, and I was just out on the road and going to a lot of places. And along the way at this time, there was a lot of interesting people that I met that had some unique background about them, and then there was a lot of fascinating places I'd been to that had some obscure history that's really interesting, but nobody knows about it. And more I was coming away from people I met and places I'd been to, and I'd say to myself, man, what a great subject for a documentary that would make. And I could just visualize in my head how I would lay it out and tell the story and everything like that, But of course the reality would then set in, as all poor starving actors who have brilliant ideas, the thoughts always conclude with, yeah, if I only had the money,
Yeah.
if I knew somebody who could back me on something like that,
So what was your first production that you said, okay, I'm going to do it, I'm going to pursue it?
Just to assure myself, again, like I said before, about having that inner creative drive that you got to get out of your system. The very first production that I ever had a chance to try to, just to prove to myself that I could do it, was Venice Beach 1985, that we will be seeing later on this evening.
Amazing. So that was your first production?
That was my first attempt at doing a documentary. And what was going on at that time, like I said, I had all these ideas, but I knew that would never come to fruition. And then around this time, in the mid-1980s, this is when home video cameras first came out. And but the thing is, even they, of course, all technology when they first come out, they're in their primitive stages, and so you can probably remember the first video cameras. They were those big boxes that you had to rest on your shoulder, and they were like 500 pixels or whatever. They certainly had more than their share of limitations. But I was telling myself then, I said, I bet even with primitive means, even with a home video camera, I bet I could create some kind of a documentary that everybody who sees it's going to really find it interesting and enjoy it. It'd be worth their time to watch it. I said, if I could just prove that to myself, I'll be satisfied. And now, of course, these home video cameras, when they came out, the standard brand, what were they, like $2,000, $2,500? You had to be established enough to have credit and buy on a payment plan or something. So even with those primitive means, I thought, I'll never be able to afford a camera. But what I discovered, though, is that although neither me or any of my other poor artist friends would ever be able to afford one, I discovered that I did have some friends whose parents owned video cameras. So the way that Venice Beach production started, I remember I was hanging out with a friend of mine named Doug, and I just told him some funny story about something that happened the last time I was out at Venice Beach. And then I concluded, I was really just kind of thinking out loud, but I shared that inner creative passion, and I said, oh man, I'd love to make a documentary about that place if I only had a video camera. And then that's when he said, well, my parents have a video camera. And I was like, oh yeah? So that was the kind of start. But I remember the first day I went out there with this guy, it was a total nightmare. This guy wouldn't do anything that I'd ask. He didn't get it. I was trying to make a documentary. I'm trying to interview people, and he's shouting out over the camera and interrupting our interviews, and just, can't keep the camera on the subject for more than a few seconds at a time. If out there on the boardwalk, there's so much going on out there. Just anything can catch your attention. So some guy's giving a performance, and a pretty girl walks by in a bikini, and he's off the subject, and I'm like, keep the camera. So that first time, it was a nightmare, and I came home. I felt like a total failure. I was like, oh man, I guess making a documentary is a lot harder than I thought. But man, it shouldn't be this difficult if I can just get some cooperation. Right. But the theater that I was working at, I remember when I made this documentary, I knew that the peak hours, the time to be there to get all this stuff would be on Saturday afternoons. That's when the boardwalk's in full swing. Yeah. And the lighting would be right with the sun and all that. And but the theater I worked at, we normally had performances on Saturday afternoons. And so normally, I had to I really couldn't afford to take time off from work, but this was far more important, Yeah. So I had somebody fill in for me, but when I came back, I was telling this guy who filled in for me about what a nightmare this experience was, and one of the young actors who was sitting nearby heard my story, and as soon as I finished telling it, he said, my parents have a video camera. I was like, oh yeah? So we were back. But
trying again.
I went out there on a total of 3 occasions, because when I went out there the second time with this new camera guy, his parents' camera, the battery, it was a separate unit. The battery was bigger than the camera. It was this big box that you had to hold on a strap over your shoulder. And we got out there, and we were shooting kind of liberally. I figured, a lot of the stuff we won't use, but it'll be good to have it anyway. And anyway, we got out there, and we hadn't shot more than about 20 minutes worth of footage before suddenly this big giant battery died. And you can't go plug it into the wall and recharge it in an hour. This is an overnight thing. So with that, I came out a third time and used it a little more conservatively the next time out. Yeah. My only regret, I went out there a total of 3 occasions. The only regret was that there was a lot of outstanding talent out there that unfortunately I never got a chance to catch up to them and capture their performance.
Really? Well, you did pretty good. I
right.
enjoyed
So,
the film,
but yeah, I figured after that I'd taken like 3 days off from work, 3 Saturday afternoons. I probably lost about $60 in that whole deal, but that was a lot to me then. And so I figured.
And then did you rent an editing system? Or
no.
Did you edit many years later?
No. Well, yeah, both. My original edit back then, my editing equipment consisted of 2 VCRs.
Oh, in a pause
I was
button.
A poor boy, man. Yeah. I had everything all queued up. I remember that what I would do is I would play a scene. I had one VCR playing, one recording. Well, as soon as the scene ended, I would hit the pause button. Yeah. But you only had a couple minutes
to queue up the next one.
Otherwise, it would just go into stop mode. It took me several attempts before I finally got a good clean. But yeah, I just went through there. I had all the cues written down and just quickly, just some quick edits. No.
So you sort of self-taught yourself editing.
Yeah.
That's great. I did that with Pixel too.
Now, what I've done here just in the last year when I rediscovered those tapes, now in the last year or so, I've been doing a lot of, I've been getting into video documentaries again for the first time in 30 years. But now I have proper editing software equipment. I have Adobe Premiere, and I've got a good HD camera and all that kind of stuff. So I'm getting back into this again. And recently I was digging through an old box of videotapes, and I found those old Venice Beach Masters. I was like, oh, it's time to do something with these again. So now the one that we're going to be seeing this evening is one that I've re-edited properly. I've got text graphics and sound effects. So more properly edited this time. Yeah. So, but yeah, that was a project that I just had to prove to myself that I could do it, so I did it.
when you're making your art, when you're making your doc or whatever else you're making, how much are you investing in tension? Like,
you know, I've never liked, and I try to avoid this in my work, is I don't want to do the viewer's thinking for them.
yeah,
You know? And so a lot of times there will be some kind of a strong message in there somewhere, but I'll think to myself, I don't think I really need to say it. You know, I think it's there. You know,
Yeah.
if anybody's paying attention to it, they'll get that. You know.
yeah,
So that's what I try to do, is just not make everything in black and white. You know, but
Yeah.
just kind of present it in a, you know, make it thought provoking, and they can
Yeah.
you know, come up with their own thoughts and,
yeah.
and
That's
opinions
good.
or whatever. You know.
Well put, Tim.
Just
Any films that made an impact on you growing up? Any other titles that stand out?
Well, like I
that-
said, the Easy Rider had a big influence on me.
besides Easy Riders.
And that, a lot of that had to do with just the scenery. You know,
Yeah.
I knew then when I was like 8 years old when that came out, I knew that, hey, when I grow up, I'm going to get me a motorcycle and I'm going to do that. I'm going to go cross country on a motorcycle.
And instead, you did on a bicycle, or you did?
No,
do
I did it on a motorcycle.
You did on a motorcycle too?
And I even, following their tradition, I went to New Orleans, although I went in from the backside, from the Florida side.
Wow,
So,
that's cool.
right.
And what first attracted you? You said you were an environmental activist. What first attracted you to activism?
Well,
Was it an event or a person?
no, I'm a environmental educator.
Educated.
I've done some activist, you know, stuff through that, but primarily after I'd been working in performing arts for a number of years, I was like in my mid-30s when I kind of did a little soul searching, and I thought, man, if I haven't got a foothold in this business by now, maybe it's time to get out of it. You know, I kind of realized, I said, I could be doing this the rest of my life and still never be any further along than I am. You know, I got discouraged after being in it for so many years and still barely getting by. And so that's when I decided to pursue an education. And so I think what drove me to it originally, my direction, was the fact that having spent most of my life here in Southern California, where it's so much congestion, you know, this urban environment here, the way I would get out and kind of level my head, you know, pacify myself, is I used to like to get out on my motorcycle and go out into the foothills or into the mountains out there, you know, and just get out there on some old mountain roads and stuff like that, and just get out there in the middle of the forest, you know.
Yeah.
And once I was out there far enough where I could not hear any man-made sounds, you
Right.
know.
Bond
And,
with nature.
Exactly. And I'd spend, you know, and I started doing a lot of camping, and I'd go out and stay out there for several days at a time, pitch a tent out there or whatever, you know. So that's how I kind of, and then more and more when I was thinking, what else would I like to do if I'm not going to do the entertainment thing anymore? And I just thought I'd like to know about nature and perhaps, you know, do something where it would put me out in this environment, you know, to work, you know. I'll go out and count birds or something, you know.
Right.
And so that's where I began pursuing it. And then I eventually obtained a bachelor's degree in wildlife sciences, got really into the wildlife issues with, you know, threatened and endangered species and things like that. And by the time I got out, though, I was like about 40 years old, you know, and physically I couldn't hold up like I used to, you know, and a lot of these kind of environmental jobs that I was once interested in, you know, it requires hiking up steep mountains and things like that. I'm like, man, I'm not really cut out for that anymore. So then I just eventually decided to pursue education, and went back and went to graduate school and got a master's in a couple of years. So that's how I got into educating, the environmental education, you know. So, and I'm trying to go that direction with my videos. Right now I'm still kind of in the learning process with documentaries, but more than anything, I'm hoping sometime in the near future I can go out and start doing some environmental documentaries, you know, and cover some wildlife issues and things like that. So hopefully that lies ahead with me.
That sounds good. So you're still pursuing documentaries. I know you shot the doc on Venice.
Mm-hmm.
You made the doc on Venice Beach, and you made a doc on hobos and riding the rails.
Yeah.
What other docs have you made?
Well, yeah, now the riding the rails in the Venice Beach, that was old video footage that I kind of put back together.
Yeah.
As far as stuff that I went out and shot, and I mentioned before about doing that documentary out in Oklahoma about this hanging.
Yeah.
And that kind of was a spare of the moment thing. I was making my way out here from my home in Tennessee. I usually spend the winters out here. And on my way out here last year, I have a cousin that lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I went and stayed there. I was just going to stay for a couple of days, and then we found out that John Fogerty was going to be playing later that week at the Hard Rock Cafe, and he can get us free tickets. And I thought, well, I'm going to stick around a couple extra days then. So somewhere in there we had a day to kill. And it occurred to me not long before I left, I was reading the story about this lynching that took place down, it was like about an hour out of Tulsa. So he said, well, what do you want to do tomorrow? We got a whole day to kill. And it occurred to me, I said, you want to go out and help me make a documentary? He's like, yeah. So that night I got online and kind of like researched all that stuff over again and kind of wrote out my script and figured out how I was going to shoot it. And all that. Yeah, we went down there and shot it. So, but although that was the first thing I shot, actually the first thing that I put out was not long after I arrived here last year. It just so happened I was making my way up to San Francisco, and I ended up taking James Dean Highway out there, the highway that he got killed on. And so just because I happened to be driving through there, I stopped and did a lot of shooting, and I ended up, there's this place out there where James Dean made his last stop. He stopped and bought some apples at a little grocery store there, but that location, what's it called? It's Blackwell's Corner, I think it's called, but they've got a couple of James Dean murals out there, big, beautiful things. And just by chance, when I was there, the artist who created them was there. He lives up in Salinas, but he was down, and he said he noticed, he was out there a few months ago, and he noticed that one of them's kind of aging. It's been up there for over 10 years, so he's kind of revarnishing it and stuff. So he's up there kind of touching it up. So I got an interview with him, and so that was, I videotaped that, and so that was actually the first one, my first project, right after I learned how to work this Adobe Premiere editing. And I decided to go ahead and put that one together before that Oklahoma one, because you know, I don't know, I was just more jazzed up about it since I just shot it. So the first one that I put out was James Dean Highway, and then after that I put together, it's called The Nelson Lynchings of 1911 is the name of the Oklahoma video documentary I shot. I've got those on my Vimeo page. Your Vimeo page. So that's 4 feature docs, or some of them are short docs? Well, those are both James Dean Highway and the Nelson lynchings are both like 14 or 15 minutes. Oh, 14 or 15. So you've done both, the short and the long. Right. Form. Just, however long it takes to tell the story or whatever, you know. So I've got some projects right now that I'm working on that are probably going to be 90 minutes or more. Yeah. And I mentioned I'm about ready to start getting into editing my Frank Zappa documentary from the time that he spent in his pre-fame years out there where I'm at now in the Ontario area. So interviewed a lot of people for that and shot a lot of videos. So I'm waiting to put that together. And then when I went back home, and I guess this is the reason why I brought it up, I mentioned how Easy Rider had a big influence on me. And when I left and went back to Tennessee last year, I actually found all the old shooting locations from where the movie was shot, you know, and like the opening credits and stuff like that. We went through Flagstaff. So I found all these old locations and reshot them, you know. And then after I'd been home for about a month or so, I eventually went down to Louisiana, because they did, you know, they bypassed, people don't know that they bypassed Texas, because they knew with long hair you don't go through Texas, you know. So they did a bunch of shooting like between here and Las Vegas, New Mexico, and then they jumped down to Louisiana. So I went down there about a month later and found all those scenes and shot them. And I ended up I met up and interviewed with, there was a famous scene in there where they go into a roadside cafe and there's all those rednecks in there talking all kinds of crap about them, you know. And one of them's the deputy sheriff. And when I got into town and I asked around, I found out that the deputy sheriff was still there. And somebody took me over to his farm and he invited me in and I got to sit down and interview him, you know. And he told me about the experience of doing that movie. So that was a kick. And probably 40 years later or something, right? Right. So sometimes when I'm out doing these things, I just happen to be going in that area, so I didn't really do a whole lot of preparation. There's some places I want to go back to where I want to do a whole lot of research, because I know there's people out there that can tell some stories. So I'm going to do a bunch of research and find these people and set things up before I go back again. You know, so. Well, good. So what first attracted you to pursue doing a Frank Zappa documentary? I imagine you heard his music and you knew he was in your area. Yeah, it was kind of weird. The first time I discovered his music, I was like 14 years old. And I was born, and at this time I was still living in San Bernardino. And I remember it was after school. I was at one of my school friends' houses, and of course, like kids do then, we like to listen to music, you know. But I remember there playing some records at my friend's house, and I was flipping through his older brother's record collection. And I came upon this album that had kind of a trippy cover on it. It was like this one size fits all. Yeah, it was a couch floating in space, you know. Couch ankle. That's a beautiful cover. And so just the cover itself got my curiosity enough going to where I took a closer look at it. And then when I looked down the track listing, I saw that one of the songs was titled San Bernardino. I was like, oh, I got to hear this. It's a song about my hometown. And I guess as soon as the needle hit the vinyl, I became like an instant Zappa fan. But
Yeah.
I know that happened, and then like a year later, I moved out into the Ontario area. I was going to Montclair High School, and the first new Zappa album that came out after I discovered his music was that live one that he did with Captain Beefheart in Texas, Bongo Fury. And I saw that in the record store, the new Zappa albums. I'm looking down the track listing, and there's a song on there called Cucamonga. It's like right next to where I'm now living, you know? So I kind of almost felt like there was some kind of kindred spirit there with us, you know? But I spent all these years in that same community in the Ontario area working as a struggling actor, and I was performing on local stages and working at this theater, but I was trying to pursue an acting career around there. And at the same time, I'd heard a lot about the Zappa legacy from his time that he spent there. And he had a studio over here, and he bought his first electric guitar from this music store over here, and things like that. So I kind of heard those stories at the time. But just sometime when I started thinking about getting back into documentaries again, there was something there where I thought the fact that I was a poor, struggling artist there about 20 years after he was, but we were both in that same area going through the same struggles, So that's when I decided, I looked into it more and more about his specific time here. And
right. Hey, we look forward to seeing that, Tim, when you get the Zappa done, and especially because you got an interview with Ray Collins before he passed away. So,
I really
is ambition based more on fear or joy?
I think it's based more on curiosity than anything else.
There you go.
Yeah.
What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
The most significant difference?
Yeah.
I've always believed that women are what keeps the human race civil.
Yeah.
Women are the civil thinkers, and I think men are more irrational.
Yeah.
And so it's I always thought that if women didn't exist, or if we were all exactly the same, we'd all be running around like a bunch of heathens.
Yeah.
I mean, why do men behave themselves? Because they know they're not going to get laid if they get crazy. When I was going to college, I had a woman friend of mine who was a little tiny girl, man, little petite thing. She's probably like maybe 5 feet tall and maybe weighed 90 pounds, but she's probably like the size of my arm. But when we were together, she could keep me in my place without ever saying a word. Every once in a while, I'd get we'd be in a restaurant or something, I'd get upset about something, I'd start to yell. Without saying a word, she just had this way of throwing her eyes at me, and I knew that was my cue to shut the hell up, and I would, because if I didn't, I'd catch hell from her later, So that kind of, a lot of people were amused by that, seeing this girl who was like less than half my size keep me so on the leash like that,
That's a good story. Well, I think you have a curiosity, plays a big part in your drive and your incentive. You think you got that on your own, or the way your parents raised you, or combo, or how'd you get? I mean, I would say that's a major element of who Tim is
right.
That drive to learn and curiosity.
Yeah, and it was just one of those, I don't know, some people just go by what others tell them, and I could never do that. I had to go out and experience things for myself and draw my own conclusions and my own opinions and so forth,
Tim, how do you find peace of mind?
Peace of mind? Well, like I said, at times especially when I'm mentally feeling very overburdened, it's just a matter of, like I said, I used to go out into the wilderness and stuff like that. Just get away from all distractions and just kind of sit and just kind of just let it all go for a while, To take that load off your mind,
Yeah.
So people do different, that's, like I said, I used to when I was back out riding freight trains and stuff like that. That was one of those kind of recreations that I would use sometimes just to kind of clear my mind. Let me just go out and jump on a freight train. I'll ride it out to Yuma, Arizona and back, and by the time I get back, I'll be a little better off. So
that's a pretty amazing move, because people would say, well, that's, first of all, it's illegal, and it's the tradition of the hobos.
Right.
What attracted you to that? Just that freedom to get away on your own?
Well, first I started off doing my cross-country motorcycle riding, and I think, after I'd done that, maybe I was just looking for another adventure, another traveling adventure of some sort.
The traveling adventure, where you're not necessarily driving, you're riding.
Right. I just want to,
It's really been romantic.
Get somewhere, I don't care where, just as long as it's not where I'm at right now,
And, hobos are so misunderstood. I think I told you one of my favorite jokes is, what's the difference between a hobo and a bum? Bum goes, got a spare cigarette? Hobo goes, smoking alone?
I enjoy that. I haven't done that in years, but yeah, some people like to go hunting or fishing or camping or whatever. But yeah, that was something that I liked. I just like to go out and ride the freight trains.
But it seems normal person that there's a high risk in being injured. It's not.
Oh yeah.
It is.
Oh,
yeah. It's risky.
You definitely gotta know what you're doing. You got to be on your toes at all times, and the train itself. People have been crushed out there in the yards. You never know when it's going to jolt or whatever. And so yeah, I know that's happened. People they're trying to get from one side of the yard to the other, and they've got all these lines that they got to try to cut across. So where those coupling units are, they're trying to like cross across there. But it happens. They're gonna back a engine into it or something like that. And boom! You just never know when that thing's gonna jolt.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's danger in riding in and of itself with the trains, but then also there is a growing criminal element out there too. So you never know when you're out there in those railroad yards. You get accosted, you can yell and scream at the top of your lungs, and who's going to hear you?
Yeah.
So you definitely got to know how to read people as well.
Yeah.
When you're out there. So
if a publisher was to release your autobiography, just off the top of your head, what would the title be?
what would the title of my autobiography been? Oh, off the top of my head, probably something like Dun and Ben.
Dun and Ben, that's a good title. I've never had that. And do you think we're hardwired for competition, or what's the function of competition? One gentleman says games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't really know who won or lost, but you can tell who is a hero and who is not.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy.
What do you think why do you think we have to be competitive? Is it healthy, or?
Well, I'll tell you, the reason why I moved out of Southern California and I went to Tennessee, I've been there for like 18 years now.
Yeah.
Is because everything was just so damn competitive out here.
Yeah.
There's more people than resources, right? So
yeah.
It's like, it drives you into this survival mode, for survival of the fittest, as I used to teach in my biology days. It's
yeah.
the people who you would think was your closest friends are going to have to stab you in the back in order for them to take a step ahead or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, it drives people. It bubbles up a ugly side of humanity. And so when I was taking these cross-country journeys, I'd get there back east to where the open land was, and just the whole attitude was so much more laid back.
Yeah.
And I think the easiest way to describe the difference, kind of something that I kind of figured out after I'd been there for about a year, was what I noticed is that out here in California, if you go into a convenience store, you need to get a pack of cigarettes or something. You go into a convenience store, you're probably going to have to wait behind 5 or 6 people there. You go to a convenience store back east, you go in there, there's one person there at the counter. Only one person you got to wait behind. But it still takes just as long to get in and out of there. Because out here, with all that competition and all that congestion, and people are trying to move, so people are fast here, they're moving.
Right.
Out there, no, man, they're in
What's
no
your
hurry at all.
hurry,
They assume
man?
that you're not either,
Yeah.
They're going to sit there and tell you all about their kids and whatever else is going on their farm that day, and they figure you want to hear it too, And I'm just like,
Right, it's like that mosey word.
Right.
I'm just moseying along.
Right. So that was something that I had to adjust to, was the slower pace out there, But that's what I went out there for, to get away from all this madness,
That's cool. And you appreciate it. You live in that slower pace, and you realize.
Been there ever since.
Yeah.
So.
So Thornton Wilder, guy wrote Our Town, pretty good play, and in 28 he said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell the secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." Tim, you've really been articulate explaining all these ways of life with me today, and I appreciate it. You told us what it's about. What's it really about?
What's it really about?
Yeah.
There's a secret in there somewhere. Sometimes it seems like it's the blind leading the blind,
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know where I'm going, so why are you following me?
That is a good line. That's all who wander
Well,
are
that's
not
hobo
necessarily
philosophy.
lost.
There was,
Yeah.
I remember I quoted that once on a CD that I made. It's some hobo philosophy that I picked up, where I was most of the full-time writers out there, they really didn't care where they were going as long as they were mobile, whereas I always had a specific destination that I was trying to get to. I knew where I wanted to go, you know. So I remember trying to get some directions from somebody, and it's like somebody told me that I should ride the Southern Pacific into the Phoenix rail yard and then get on the
right.
You know, but anyway, when it came to getting directions, this one guy just tells me, he said, "It doesn't matter how you get there if you don't know where you're going." And I was like, well, I do know where I'm going or where I'm trying to get to, but that was their philosophy of life.
Right.
Doesn't matter how you get there if you don't know where you're going. When the train comes, just jump on it and see where it takes you, you know?
That is a great, I mean, the hobo is the ultimate American
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
When I first got into doing like with this documentary thing, when I did this Venice Beach video so many years ago, I was telling myself back then, I could see it all in my head, and I thought, if I can just put on the screen what I envision in my head, you know, if I can just put it on there and see what it looks like, you know. I mean, it looks brilliant in my mind, you know.
Right.
So it's just, yeah, I just had to do that. I had to visualize the thought, you know. I had to get it on the screen to see what it was, you know, what it looked like. So, you know, there's optimism in trying to come up with something creative that is fulfilling and will put on a positive effect on other people.
Yeah.
Some other people will get something out of this.
Yeah.
You know? It's maybe that's the educator in me. I want to enlighten other people.
Yeah.
Know? I feel enlightened. I want to share that with others.
Yeah.
So
Sharon's a great attitude, and really looking forward to showing Venice Beach 1985 tonight. And Tim Corvin, it's really been a pleasure.
Yes, sir, Gerry. Thank you for having me over.
It's really nice.